Even though our CentOS virtual machine has a graphical interface, you will be using SSH to connect to the virtual machine to make the exercises more realistic. In a real production installation scenario, you most likely won't have physical access to the server, and most servers do not have graphical interfaces. So you should become accustomed to using SSH to interact with and configure the server. In this video, we'll show you how to do this on Windows and on Linux. On Windows, we recommend using PuTTY as your SSH client. You can download PuTTY by navigating to putty.org and clicking on the link here, and then selecting the appropriate installer for your system. After the installer downloads, go ahead and launch the installer, and then follow the steps. Once it's installed, go ahead and launch the PuTTY utility, and it should look like this. If you're on Linux, go ahead and launch a terminal, and then attempt to run the command SSH with the version option to see if it's installed. It should provide instructions for how to install it if it's not. In this case, it's installed, and on many Linux systems, it comes pre-installed. So once you have either the SSH client on Linux or PuTTY installed on Windows, you're ready to connect to the machine. Before you can connect to your server using SSH, you will need to obtain the machine's IP address or fully qualified domain name. And you'll also need credentials that you can use to log in with. Normally, these will be provided by the hosting service or whoever is maintaining your server. However, since we are using a virtual machine, we will need to log in and retrieve the IP address ourselves. The credentials are already provided in the course materials. So go ahead and log in using the password that's provided. Then open a terminal. And type ifconfig. Locate the entry that starts with EN, and then identify the IP address. For me, it's this IP address, 192.168.99.105. The 192.168 indicates that this is a local IP address, and it won't be accessible off our machine, or really off the network that we're on. But we can use it for our exercises. So I'll go ahead and note that, and then we'll go and use SSH to log in. In Windows, launch PuTTY if you haven't already, and then enter the IP address that you noted earlier in this field titled hostname or IP address. For me, it's 192.168.99.105. Leave the port at 22 unless you've been instructed otherwise by your IT department or service provider. Go ahead and press open. If you see this alert message, go ahead and press yes to accept the fingerprint. PuTTY will launch with a new console that prompts you for your credentials. Go ahead and enter the username, which is Tethys, and then the password that's provided in the course materials. If you're successful, you should see this last login and a date. In Linux, you'll use the SSH command line client to connect to the server. Simply type SSH, then type the username of the server, and the IP address. Then press enter, and enter the password. You should see the same output as you saw in PuTTY. There's one last thing that you need to check while you're logged onto the server. You're going to need sudo permission or sudo access to complete many of the steps of the installation process. To test this, run sudo date. Enter the password, press enter. If you see the date, then you have sudo access. If you see some message indicating that you don't have permissions to do this operation, then you don't have sudo access. you will need to contact your server administrator to request access. If you are unable to get sudo permissions on the server, then you will need to be assisted by someone that has them.